So I was listening to a podcast about the historicity of the Shroud of Turin, and I was also recently listening to the Mormon Stories podcast about Nahom, and I realized that these are similar things. You know, the Shroud of Turin for Christians is very similar to Nahom for Mormons, where, these things don't actually have to be legitimate. Like the Shroud of Turin could be an early modern fabrication, and that doesn't make Christianity less true. Just like Nahom can just be a South Arabic, altar from the tribe of Nim or whatever, and that doesn't make Mormonism false. But apologists for both religions fight so fiercely on those topics. And, it kind of nonplussed me a bit, like, you don't, like, this doesn't have to be true. Like, this is really, it's not remotely, critical for your religion for these things to be true. There's no need to make reasoning errors and bend text and do all the things you have to do to make Nahom, fit perfectly or whatever. But I realized that I think it's actually so important to them because it's a means of offense. So when it comes to Mormon apologetics, it's mostly defense. It's mostly critics coming in and saying, well, you have to explain horses in the Book of Mormon. You have to explain iron, or you have to explain the whole Deutero-Isaiah thing or whatever. And most of the time apologists are on the defense. But with something like Nahom or chiasmuses, regardless of how legitimate or, powerful those evidences actually are, it's for them, at least from their perspective, it's a change in power dynamic, where all of a sudden they can flip the script and say, well, you have to explain Nahom, you have to explain chiasmuses. And even though if you were to list all the, positive evidences like that compared to negative evidences, and weight them properly, the negative evidences would be vastly larger than the positive evidences. But when it comes to things like Nahom, they can just forget about those, extremely heavy negative evidences, and they can just, kind of temporarily live in a world where, there's these powerful positive evidences for the Book of Mormon, and that if defenders and also, the inner critic inside their head, if these critics can't explain perfectly, the whole deal with Nahom or chiasmuses, then Mormon apologists get to feel powerful, triumphant. They get to feel that their faith is defended, that their internal doubts can, be suppressed. Maybe I shouldn't psychoanalyze too deeply. That's probably presumptive and arrogant. But I think for me it's a power dynamic reversal. I think it absolutely is the case. Because, like I said, these things aren't that critical. Nahom doesn't have to be legitimate for the Book of Mormon to be real, but they want it to be.